السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، السلام عليك يا ابن رسول الله، السلام عليك يا ابن أمير المؤمنين وابن سيد الوصيين، السلام عليك يا ابن فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين، السلام عليك يا آثار الله وابن ثاره والوتر الموتور، السلام عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك، عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار. يا أبا عبد الله، لقد عظمت الرزية وجلت وعظمت المصيبة بك علينا وعلى جميع أهل الإسلام، وجلت وعظمت مصيبتك في السماوات على جميع أهل السماوات، فلعن الله أمة أسست أساس الظلم والجور عليكم أهل البيت، ولعن الله أمة دفعتكم عن مقامكم وأزالتكم عن مراتبكم التي رتبكم الله فيها، ولعن الله أمة قتلتكم، ولعن الله الممهدين لهم بالتمكين من قتالكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم ومن أشياعهم وأتباعهم وأوليائهم. يا أبا عبد الله، إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم إلى يوم القيامة، ولعن الله آل زياد وآل مروان، ولعن الله بني أمية قاطبة، ولعن الله ابن مرجان، ولعن الله عمر بن سعد، ولعن الله شمرا، ولعن الله أمة أسرجت وألجمت وتنقبت لقتالك. بأبي أنت وأمي لقد عظم مصابي بك، فأسأل الله الذي أكرم مقامك وأكرمني بك أن يرزقني طلب ثارك مع إمام منصور من أهل بيت محمد صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم اجعلني عندك وجيها بالحسين عليه السلام في الدنيا والآخرة. يا أبا عبد الله، إني أتقرب إلى الله وإلى رسوله وإلى أمير المؤمنين وإلى فاطمة وإلى الحسن وإليك بموالاتك وبالبراءة ممن قاتلك ونصب لك الحرب، وبالبراءة ممن أسس أساس الظلم والجور عليكم، وأبرأ إلى الله وإلى رسوله ممن أسس أساس ذلك وبنى عليه بنيانه وجرى في ظلمه وجوره عليكم وعلى أشياعكم. برئت إلى الله وإليكم منهم، وأتقرب إلى الله ثم إليكم بموالاتكم وموالاة وليكم والبراءة من أعدائكم والناصبين لكم الحرب، وبالبراءة من أشياعهم وأتباعهم. إني سلم لمن سالمكم وحرب لمن حاربكم وولي لمن والاكم وعدو لمن عاداكم. فأسأل الله الذي أكرمني بمعرفتكم ومعرفة أوليائكم ورزقني البراءة من أعدائكم أن يجعلني معكم في الدنيا والآخرة، وأن يثبت لي عندكم قدم صدق في الدنيا والآخرة، وأسأله أن يبلغني المقام المحمود لكم عند الله، وأن يرزقني طلب ثاري مع إمام هدى ظاهر ناطق بالحق منكم، وأسأل الله بحقكم وبالشأن الذي لكم عنده أن يعطيني بمصابي بكم أفضل ما يعطي مصابا بمصيبته، مصيبة ما أعظمها وأعظم رزيتها في الإسلام وفي جميع السماوات والأرض. اللهم اجعلني في مقامي هذا ممن تناله منك صلوات ورحمة ومغفرة. اللهم اجعل محياي محيا محمد وآل محمد، ومماتي ممات محمد وآل محمد. اللهم إن هذا يوم تبركت به بنو أمية وابن آكلة الأكباد، اللعين وابن اللعين، على لسانك ولسان نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله في كل موطن وموقف وقف فيه نبيك صلى الله عليه وآله. اللهم لعن أبا سفيان ومعاوية ويزيد بن معاوية، عليهم منك اللعنة أبد الآبدين. وهذا يوم فرحت به آل زياد وآل مروان بقتلهم الحسين صلوات الله عليه. اللهم فضاعف عليهم اللعن منك والعذاب الأليم. اللهم إني أتقرب إليك في هذا اليوم وفي موقفي هذا وأيام حياتي بالبراءة منهم واللعنة عليهم، وبالموالاة لنبيك وآل نبيك عليه وعليهم السلام. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد، وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن العصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله، وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك. عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار، ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. اللهم خص أنت أول ظالم باللعن مني، وابدأ به أولا ثم العن الثاني والثالث والرابع. اللهم لعن يزيد خامسا، والعن عبيد الله بن زياد وابن مرجانة وعمر بن سعد وشمرا وآل أبي سفيان وآل زياد وآل مروان إلى يوم القيامة. سجود. اللهم لك الحمد حمد الشاكرين لك على مصابهم، الحمد لله على عظيم رزيتي. اللهم ارزقني شفاعة الحسين يوم الورود، وثبت لي عندك قدم صدق مع الحسين وأصحاب الحسين الذين بذلوا مهجهم دون الحسين عليه السلام. وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. شورش است که در خلق عالم است، باز این چه شورش است، باز این چه شورش شورش است که در خلق عالم است. باز این چه نوحه و چه عزا و چه ماتم است. باز این چه نوحه و چه عزا و چه ماتم است. باز این چه شورش است. باز این چه شورش است که در خلق عالم است. باز این چه نوحه و چه عزا و چه ماتم است. باز این چه نوحه و چه عزا و چه ماتم است. سرهای قدسیان همه بر زانوی غم است. سرهای قدسیان همه بر زانوی غم است. گویا عزای اشرف اولاد آدم است. گویا عزای اشرف اولاد آدم است. سرهای قدسیان همه بر زانوی غم است. گویا عزای اشرف اولاد آدم است. گویا عزای اشرف اولاد آدم است. زینب به سرزنان بهر چه می دود. زینب به سرزنان بهر چه می دود. با ناله و فغان سوی که می رود. با ناله و فغان سوی که می رود. زینب به سرزنان بهر چه می دود. زینب به سرزنان بهر چه می دود. با ناله و فغان سوی که می دود. با ناله و فغان سوی که می رود. او را چه می شود نامه که می برد. او را چه می شود نامه که می برد. دم به دم می زند فریاد با حسینش. دم به دم می زند فریاد با حسینش. وای حسینم وای حسینم وای حسینم وای حسینم وای حسینم وای حسینم. باز این چه شورش است. باز این چه شورش است که در خلق عالم است. باز این چه نوحه و چه عزا و چه ماتم است. باز این چه نوحه و چه عزا و چه ماتم است. سرهای قدسیان همه بر زانوی غم است. سرهای قدسیان همه بر زانوی غم است. گویا عزای اشرف اولاد آدم است. گویا عزای اشرف اولاد آدم است. زینب به سرزنان بهر چه می دود. زینب به سرزنان بهر چه می دود. با ناله و فغان سوی که می رود. با ناله و فغان سوی که می رود. او را چه می شود نامه که می برد. او را چه می شود نام که می برد دم به دم می زند فریاد با حسینش دم به دم می زند فریاد با حسینش وای حسینم 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 صلوات
أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. ثانيا غفر الله لكم. على حب الزهراء بعد أوصافه.
Is a cup better for you than added so you don't have to open the cap and close it? We have cups. Fine. Are you sure? Yeah. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة بعد الصلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وبه نستعين لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. والحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين شفيع المذنبين رحمة للعالمين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا والشفيع نفوسنا والطبيب ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجهم. ثم الصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين ولعنة الله على أعدائهم أجمعين من الأولين والآخرين إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد. صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على محمد. Mu'mineen, mu'minat, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Last night, we were finishing up our discussion and giving this analogy about the different types of aza and azadari and the different ways that we manifest this message of Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And we used the analogy given by Imam Khomeini, qaddasallahu sirru, of this divine sword, this Shamshir Ilahi. And we said that either this sword can be used literally on Zalimeen outside, it can be used on yourself in terms of ma'tam, latmiyat, sinizani, something like that. Or you can use it in a more metaphorical or spiritual sense, where you can look after the dhulm that's outside through social justice programs, taking care of the poor, feeding the homeless, something like that. Or look inwards and try to reform the self by mourning in these states, wearing black, reciting poetry, coming to these majalis wal-aza, reciting du'as, ziyarat, performing the a'mal. So there's many different ways of performing aza. Now what we didn't answer was which of these is the best. Now all we alluded to was that if a person just grabs one of these and only one of these, and they take this and they put it on a pedestal and they say, look, this is my type and that's it, everybody else is, not the real kind, then this is going to be our first issue. Unfortunately, we've recently, especially when we have these more multicultural centers, but even when they're ethnocentric centers, sometimes we get in this habit of telling everybody else that our azah, the way we do azah, is better than everybody else's. The way that we worship, the way that we commemorate our culture is better than everyone else's. And this is a major issue. We said that there's only two ways of performing azah. In the same way, there's only really two ways of living your life. And, azah is one part of that. Either we can live according to our nafs, we can decide whatever we want to do in our lives, make our own decisions. Whatever God says, not a big deal. Whatever the Quran says, whatever. The hadith, the seed of the Ahlul Bayt, it doesn't matter to me. That's one way of going. You and I can put our ego into the equation and we can make the decision. And think that, rationally or logically, that's the excuse that we give. Rationally, logically, this is the best way to do something. Or scientifically, or whatever. And then we go and make that decision. The other way is actually taking a look at the advice, especially in this regard, from the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. How did they do certain things? For example, azah. How did they commemorate and perform these actions? What did they do? And over here is where we can have a small discussion. Now, I don't want to take too much time. Normally this lecture where we talk about the history of the movement of azah, the harakah, and the evolution and the changes throughout time usually takes about 45 minutes to an hour. I don't want to go through all that because many of you have requested that we start the main topic of Salatul Mu'min. And inshallah, hopefully if we have time, we can start that tonight. So I'm going to give just a very quick overview, a brief overview of the different periods, the different changes in azah over time, starting right after the event of Karbala, and ending up until pretty much our time right now. What exactly has happened? And then after we go through this, it should be fairly obvious whether or not we are practicing the same azah as the Shuhada of Karbala, or the families of the Shuhada, the Ahlul Bayt, or those who were closest to the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salatu wasalam, salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. The first period of azah was, of course, right after the tragedy of Karbala. Right there is when the azah began, and these majalis, so to speak, began. But see, those majalis that were, let's say, commemorated or carried on by Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam or Imam Sajjad alayhi salam were nothing like anybody else's, not even the other members of the Ahlul Bayt. Their main objective at that point was to go and share exactly what happened, to tell them the waqi'atul Karbala, to tell them what happened over here. So as they go from Karbala to Kufa, from Kufa to Sham, from Sham back to Medina, every single place that they stop, every person they meet, their main job is to just inform people. It's ikhbar, that's all they're doing. They're telling people what happened in Karbala. And along with that, in conjunction with that, if they were telling people who had no idea what happened, then it was simply ikhbar, they got the khabar about what happened and that's it. But for certain individuals, like for example, Ahl Kufa, they said, you knew what was taking place. You were told ahead of time. But you stopped, for example, you stopped your husbands from coming out and defending my brother Hussein. Or Imam Sajjad would say, my father Hussein. Or when they say Ruqayya would give a khutbah, she said, you didn't come out and defend my father Hussein. Because we know we had various khutbahs given by various members of the Ahlul Bayt. In addition to them mentioning what happened in Karbala, many of them would basically in a sense, insult or condemn the people that they met, saying that you have allowed this to happen. And all of this buka, all this crying, the remorse, the guilt that you have now is completely useless. And one of the khutbahs in Kufa of Imam Sadat alayhi salam, he pretty much says exactly that statement. He says, you're crying now that we're telling you it happened, your cries are useless. We don't want your cries. You're giving us your bay'ah now, keep your bay'ah. We don't want bay'ah from those who do khiyana to us. You betrayed us. You wrote the letters, but when we needed you on the battlefield, you didn't come out. When my father needed you, when the ashab needed you, you were nowhere to be found. You were cowards. So now you're crying, you want to be these tawabin, it doesn't matter anymore. It's completely useless. So what we see immediately following the tragedy is pretty much two things. Ikhbar, meaning just telling people what happened. And if they were those who pretty much knew what was going on, then they also basically insulted them or condemned them and made them feel remorseful and pretty much told them that your Islam, your Iman is non-existent because of what you allowed to happen. And this pretty much carried on for the first few Imams, meaning Sayyida Zainab, Imam Sajjad, and that immediate era right after. This was the main thing. After that, then we move on to the next phase, which some say start with Imam Baqir alayhi salam, Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, and then continuing on to Imam al-Qadim alayhi salam. In these middle Imams, what they now start to do is encourage poetry to be recited as well. So in addition to explaining to people what happened in Karbala, most people already had known by that point. So now we want to strengthen people's connection through the idea of poetry. So they recognize that emotions have a role to play. It's not simply just telling people what happened, but to try using strong poetic language to capture the emotional part of human beings. We're not always rational all the time, as some may think that we are. It's not just that you give us some theory, some abstract idea, and then all of a sudden we change. No. Most human beings, even according to basic psychological research, if you can't give a good emotional argument, people won't change their minds. You can give them logic, you can give them reasoning, you can give them scientific stuff, it won't matter. Emotions seem to be the way that most human beings change their mind. Perhaps this is why you have the members of the Ahlul Bayt at that point constantly encouraging, holding majalis, and then at the majalis, besides telling the story of Karbala, they also were having poets recite different types of poetry. Again, these eulogies, noha, right, as we would say. So this is pretty much now, as we're moving on. These imams are pretty much there's only two ways that they're doing this in terms of their timeline. Either that they are only, like the fifth or sixth imam, for example, their only commemoration, according to the hadith that we have, seems to only be on the day of Ashura. Nothing else. That's what it seems like from our hadith. And then when we get to Imam al-Qadim alayhi salam, then we see some narrations that say that once the month of Muharram started, meaning from the first up until Ashura, they say he was in a state of grief, which gradually increased from the first, second, all the way up until Yawm al-Ashura. And that's where they say he reached the peak of his huzn and his grief. And then pretty much there was nothing after that. So this is what we are seeing from the Imams in the second phase after the immediate tragedy. Then we move on to the next phase, which is what they say in the academic world, the Buyid era, right? So this whole time, basically the Abbasids are the ones that are in charge. The Buyids, again, I don't want to really go into the history. Buyid, or in Arabic you say Buwayhid, right? These were basically Iranians, or like Daylami Iranians, that had come to power. They were a military power that allowed the Abbasids to run everything. But they were fake running the Islamic government. They actually didn't have any power. So think of the Queen of England right now. Does she actually say anything about England? Does she pass any rule? No, she doesn't say anything or do anything. So at that time, we're now talking about maybe, let's say around the 10th Imam's time. The Abbasids, their power is pretty much gone because they had lost everything to their military. So the Turks that they employed in the military had taken a lot of power. The Iranians that they had employed, like the Daylamis, like the Buyids, they had taken power. So from there, it became a battle of which military force was stronger. And at this point, it was the Buyid Empire, or the Buyid soldiers. So they had become so strong that they were pretty much telling the Abbasids what they could do and what they couldn't do. So in this sense, this was really the first actual Shia government or empire that we had during the time of the Imams, really. Because the Abbasids, we don't count them as Shias, although some scholars would say they were Shias, basically by name at most. But Buyids, either they were Ismailis or, there's a difference of opinion there, but some would even say they were Ithna Ashari Shias. Regardless of that, regardless of their practice, Shi'ism began to take a very public manifestation, in the sense that during the Buyid era, they began to publicly commemorate the Ayam of Azza. So this is where you start to see now, commemorating for 10 days began to be a norm, or at least in some provinces, at least on the Yom Ashura. So this is where we start to see, majalis become more of a formal thing. Poetry starts to become more of a formal thing. What we would start to understand in terms of a real majlis, it starts to take shape there. Not exactly the same as ours, but very close. Now we quickly fast forward. I'm going to skip, some history here. Now we come to everybody's favorite dynasty, the Safavi, or the Safavid dynasty. Over here is now where we see the closest thing to our modern day majalis. This is where now you have Ithna Ashari Shias, it's a government there, an empire. And they, for whatever the reasons are, we don't have to discuss the actual ikhlas or lack thereof of the Safavids, that's not under discussion right now. But over there is where you see a strong formalization of majalis, of azza. And this is where you start to see now, for example, Arba'een having a bit more value than before. Or not just the 12 or 10 or 12 days of Muharram, but they start to carry it on for longer periods of time. So, and again, it's not simply just reciting poetry, it's not simply just recounting the stories. Now you start to see there are actual khutbahs, there's actually speeches being given as well. Right? Maybe not exactly like right now, but very similar to how we would have programs right now. It's a very public sort of event. Things are shut down in public society. So again, I'm skipping a lot of details here because I don't want to turn this lecture into pure history because I don't know if everybody's interested in that. The way that we commemorate our Azza right now, our cultural practices are largely based upon what the Safavids first started. That's where it's coming from. Which means what? What we are doing right now is very, very loosely related to what the Ahlul Bayt were doing. Very loosely. Many people say we have to go back to the tradition, back to what the Ahlul Bayt want. Right? They say this in a lot of regards. Okay, if that's what you're saying, then this speech that we're doing right now, cut that out, because there was no such speech. There was no lecture during the times of the Ahlul Bayt. That didn't exist. It was simply the actual waqa'ah, or we would say the musibah, masa'ib, or the gham, that's it, and poetry. These were pretty much the only two things that existed during the time of the Ahlul Bayt. Everything else seems to have been introduced by outside forces. Now, with that there, adding these things is not haram, obviously. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The only reason we're bringing this up is because people nowadays, they want to say that their version is better than somebody else's version, or this is the way we need to do azah, not that way. Well, look, if we are saying if you think the ideal way is the way the Ahlul Bayt did it, well, guess what? The way that every culture is doing it is completely off. It's not the way the Ahlul Bayt did it. So that can't be the model. If you want to go back to that way, then go back. That means poetry and masa'ib, and then you're done. You're welcome to do that. But what you see is, again, because of different cultural practices, based on the needs of our communities right now, we've changed the format. We've updated it because of the needs that we have right now. Maybe back in that time, when the Ahlul Bayt were going around and mentioning the story of Karbala and mentioning that poetry, maybe the people that they're speaking to don't need to learn how to perform wudu. Maybe they don't need to, learn the philosophy and the wisdom of salah. Maybe they don't need to learn about proofs of God's existence or things like that, because that was a norm for them. It was obvious to them. It didn't matter to them. Or maybe because they recognized that that wasn't the most important thing at that point, given the audience that they were speaking to. But things have changed now. Right now, alhamdulillah, as a base, we have the poetry, and we have the musibah and masa'ib. And that's good, that needs to remain. So all the extremists on one side who say just have a lecture, say, look, if you're doing that, you are completely disregarding and discarding what the Ahlul Bayt have advised us to do. They have told us to cry. They have told us to wear black. They have told us to feel grief. At the very least, we see from the Ahlul Bayt, on at least Yom Ashura, we need to show that grief outside and encourage our family, hold majalis, at least on Ashura. From Imam al-Qadim alayhi salam, it seems at least him, maybe not others, at least he was in grief for 10 days. Some people say, no, we need to do all the way up until Arba'een, or all the way up until Eid al-Zahra or Eid al-Shujaa. This you don't really find from the Ahlul Bayt. Now again, if we want to do that, that's up to you. That's up to us. We can decide how much we want to mourn. That's okay. But for us to now look down upon others who don't do that, that's going to be an issue. One of the definitions of shirk that we have from the Ahlul Bayt, this is a hadith, if I'm not mistaken, attributed to Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, where he talks about shirk. He says, one of the ways you can tell whether you're performing shirk or not, shirk is not just saying that there's more than one God. That's a simple way. There's other ways too. Imam, according to this hadith that's attributed to him, says that shirk is also when you take a certain milak, a criteria, barometer. You take something, you use that, and you start judging other individuals. When they So for example, who, let's say, does not, for example, come to, I'm trying to think of examples. They'll say they don't come to the lectures in the month of Ramadan, right? There's usually nightly lectures, right? So they don't come. Okay, so they don't come. You say, no, this person is not a real Muslim, he's not a real mu'min. No, that's not allowed. That's not part of the deen directly. You can't judge somebody's spirituality just because they don't do something that culturally we have developed over time. We could even extend that. The way that, let's say, we perform ma'ata, the way that we, make a circle or make lines and recite something and beat our chest in a very rhythmic sort of fashion. This didn't exist during that time. This was something that came along either during the Buyid era or more likely during the Safavid era. If we're going to, we definitely need to make sure everybody does this, and if you don't do this, you're a real lover of Hussein. No, may Allah accept it. Putting yourself up on a pedestal because you think your azah is better than somebody else. Especially when we have this exact same azah from the Ahlul Bayt, right? In the same light, again, the other people from the other extreme, when they say, people are not learning intellectual things, they're not coming and reading books, they're doing this and that. Okay, fine. Do you see the Ahlul Bayt mentioning that directly? If not, then don't start judging other people. If we have various different needs in our community right now, if we have people on different levels, if the imams are telling us do not judge different people by things which are not directly mentioned in the deen, because this is shirk, then we have to be very, very careful about what we determine to be the best or worst type of azah in our communities. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. If we were to quickly summarize, we'd say, look, there's pretty much 3 different types of azah that take place in communities right now. One is what we would call a negative traditional, right? Like sunnati salbi. What do I mean? You have individuals and speakers who come, their only objective is to talk about the history of what happened from a very negative aspect. When I say negative, I don't mean that it's bad, but I'm saying in this sense. Salbi, that they're going to mention, for example, Saqifa. They're going to mention the other events, like the first 3 Khulafa. They'll mention Muawiyah. And of course, they'll mention Yazid, and they'll mention everything in a certain succession about how all of this led up to Karbala, and that would pretty much be their only objective. Is to say, look, it's a polemical discussion for us in the month of Muharram. The day of Ashura is nothing but Sunni Shia stuff. That's all it is. Because of what they did, this is where we are right now. So they mention these negative qualities of other individuals or other sects. They talk about history from that perspective, a negative perspective. Sometimes that, again, might upset certain individuals. Again, I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong yet, but I'm saying that's one perspective taken, especially in communities overseas, especially by speakers, let's say, from other backgrounds. And that's their main objective, right? So a very negative traditional way of doing this. That's one type. There's another type too, which you would say it's thubuti, or it's positive. But it's also sunnati. Now what does that mean? So they don't really want to talk about history. They don't talk about polemics. It's not Sunni Shia stuff. They don't talk about Saqifa necessarily, or the first day Khulafa, or what led up to Ashura. They don't talk about anything like that. These types of speakers and their speeches, the main objective is just to get people motivated, just to help them get attracted back to the deen. And the way that they usually do that is by mentioning the fada'il of the Ahlul Bayt. So rather than Saqifa, they'll mention Khandaq or Khaybar or Badr or something like that, right? Rather than mentioning the negative qualities of, let's say, the first two khulafa or the other ashab that you and I maybe don't have that much respect for, we'll mention the ashab or, of course, the A'immah alayhimus salam that we do have respect for. And we'll mention all their positive qualities, and we'll give these wonderful stories, and we'll talk about how great the Shia are, and that we're guaranteed Jannah, and all these things. And it'll boost up our morale. And the hopes of those kind of speakers is that if we can boost up the morale of the Shia, maybe they'll change the way that the level of practice, right? Maybe if we boost your egos a little bit, we tell you how great you are, that you're guaranteed Jannah, maybe you'll go pray Salat after this, maybe, right? So that's their objective. So far we have two different ways that people have approached it. Either a negative traditional or a positive traditional. Either talking about just the negative aspects of history or the positive aspects of history. These have been the two so far. The third one, which nowadays we see some speakers using, is what we call a ta'aleemi, or educational way. And for them, their main objective is not simply just to mention a few things in history, whether positive or negative. Not just to motivate or demotivate people. Their job is that, look, there are many different areas, types of ulum and sciences and subjects and mafahim and things in Islam that you and I have no clue about whatsoever. Maybe it happens to do with tariq. Even till this day, people ask me and they come to me and they say, look, we hear all these things during the masa'ib, in terms of the story of Karbala, but then when we look in the history books, something else is written there. Which one's actually true? Even the history of Karbala itself, a lot of people don't really know. Again, I'm not saying what's recited in the masa'ib is always incorrect. That's not an accurate statement. But sometimes people can get confused. They read this maqtal and this maqtal, they say, what's going on over here? And sometimes, I'll give you my own example. I'm growing up in a traditional, desi place, right? So our community was Indian Pakistani. So we had these specific types of speakers who recited their musibah and masa'ib a certain way. And when they did that, every single night was dedicated, the musibah was dedicated to one individual or one concept or one idea. This night is Abbas's night, Ali Akbar's night, Ali Asghar's night, Abdullah, Ruqayya, etc. In my mind, because nobody explained the actual history, I'm thinking every night in Muharram somebody's going out and fighting, and every night somebody's dying and becoming shaheed. That's what I thought, because nobody explained it otherwise. I didn't have this idea in my mind that they all went out on Asr Ashura. It all happened in a span of a few hours or less in the afternoon. I had no idea, because nobody ever explained the proper history like that. Some communities, they know better, maybe because they read the whole maqtal, right, on the day, so they know that. But not every community has that. So certain communities, even the history of Karbala is completely unknown to them. So for them, they want to know. Even the history of the Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma sallam. Really interesting, important points about his life, we may not know. There's a lot of information. There's a reason that for every single member of the Ahlul Bayt, including Rasulullah, and every single Imam, sometimes for those of us who can only read, let's say, English, all we get are, small little articles, small excerpts, or sometimes speakers will come and they'll do like a 45-minute lecture or a 1-hour lecture, and they claim that they dissect the topic in depth. You can't do that. In 45 minutes to an hour, you can't describe the life of a ma'soom. It can't happen. It's impossible. There's too many things happening, and there's too much analysis that's required. This is why ulama, they have a mawsu'ah of the Ahlul Bayt. Each member of the Ahlul Bayt has their own, volumes and volumes dedicated to their lives. Yes, when it comes to the later imams, we have less information for reasons that those who know, they know. But for a good majority of the members of the Ahlul Bayt, we have a lot of information. And it's not simply just one or two stories. It's many stories, many different lessons we can learn. And there's a lot of different points that we can analyze and, learn from that. Why did certain imams work with their government, whether it was the Umayyads or the Abbasids or the Buyyids? Why did they do that? Why did certain imams refuse to? Why did certain imams support certain types of revolutions openly? Some types of revolutions they supported quietly. Sometimes they didn't support anything at all. These are differences in the way that they do things. Is there one specific way that all the members of the Ahlul Bayt took or not? Unless we go through the seerah of all the Ahlul Bayt, we have no idea. That's why, this book that was fairly recently by Ayatollah Khamenei, hafidhahullah, right, Insan Devisto Panja Saleh, right, the 250-year-old person, right? That's the best way to translate it. Now, it's been translated in English by some organizations, not the best translation, so usually I don't think it's been publicly, disseminated. But that book, the theory there is that it's not 14 separate ma'asumin, it's not 12 separate imams. It's one specific personality that has one mission that's happening throughout. And they're all just building up for one specific idea. So this is Ayatollah Khamenei's theory. You could disagree with it if you want. He has the right to his own historical theory, right? And other ulama have written about this concept as well. So it's a very interesting idea. These are things that are worthy of discussing. Because when you take all of the different siras, the sirat of the Ahlul Bayt, and you put it together, it creates a whole different picture. Rather than the sort of disconnected pictures that you and I get. So this is just one thing that we can be educated on. Now what about akhlaq? Akhlaq for you and I, sometimes it's be good, give charity. Okay, well, how do I, what kind of charity? Well, let me share you this story of this imam and this imam. And in the middle of the night, they gave bread to somebody. Or in the middle of the night, they went and gave this person money. Or one of their enemies came and they gave them a bag of money. So that's good. We see the examples of the imams giving money to all different types. Shi'as, non-Shi'as, non-Muslims. Even their enemies. Even family members who were spies for the Abbasids. They would give, sadaqah to all of them. So okay, that's nice, but does that really answer all of the questions that you and I might have about the concept of sadaqah itself? Think about right now, here in Orlando. When we drive around on the streets, clearly there are fuqara, there are homeless people who are sitting there with signs begging. Can any of you give me a straight answer, a clear answer with yaqeen and itminan from the Ahlul Bayt? Again, not from our own nafs, our own presumptions and assumptions and opinions. From a clear proof from the lives of the Ahlul Bayt that would tell you what to do when you see somebody on the side of the road with a sign. Clearly, probably non-Muslim. Maybe they're involved in haram things, and maybe you have a good idea that they're going to take that money and buy something haram with it. What do you do in that situation? Many people that I talk to say, look, I know what they're going to spend it on, so I'm not going to give them anything. And for them, that's a rational idea. Others say, well, it's not my job to research. It's not my job to ask questions. I should give them something. But I can't give them a lot because, again, maybe they might buy something, so I'll give them some, very little amount. Others might say, you know what, I shouldn't give them any money at all. Maybe I just go and buy some food, and then I'll give it to them because they might be hungry. Or I'll buy them a water bottle, or something like that. Everybody has their own idea. But has anybody actually quoted any example from the Ahlul Bayt when they're giving these opinions and ideas? Again, anytime I've talked to anybody, not one person has ever quoted that I'm doing this because Imam so-and-so has done this. I've never heard anybody say that. It's always their own ideas. Even something like giving charity here. We don't have a clear idea. If we had been educated on the concept of sadaqah, or in a more theoretical context, the Islamic welfare system, the ideal Islamic welfare system, the ideal Islamic economic system, then we'd have clearer principles in mind and we would know how to act, regardless of who asks us. Or another part of the question that comes. Let's say it's not a non-Muslim on the street. It's a Muslim in our community, a Shia, a practicing Shia. But they keep asking every month for money. And now they're becoming dependent on our sadaqah. Isn't it better to teach them how to fish rather than to give them fish? Right? Isn't this a concept that most of us have in our mind too? Rather than me giving them hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars every month, they're just going to be dependent. That's not good for their dignity. Isn't it better that I get them a job or I teach them a trade so that they can go work? So instead of me giving them money, let me offer this. What if they say no? Say, no, I don't want to work. I don't want to learn coding, or I don't want to do this. I just need the money. That's all I need to pay my rent. I need the money to buy food or medicine for my kids. What do you do there? Do you say yes or no? Do you deny them because they refuse to work? Or do you say yes because, charity is still good no matter what? And whatever your answer is, again, can you source this to the aqwal and the sayings of the Ahlul Bayt or not? I'm giving multiple examples just to show us that, look, going through the history that you and I have talked about before, it might have some benefit. It's good to hear the history. I'm not going to deny that. Is it nice? Does it, build up our Shia morale when we hear about Khandaq and Khaybar and all this stuff? Yeah, it's good. It's got benefit to it. I'm not going to deny that. Is that really our need right now? That's the question. And I know some people say, oh yeah, for the youth, we need to do the educational stuff. I said, no. Every time, especially when I speak with elders, they always say, it's for the youth we need to do this. I said, alaykum anfusakum. The Quran says, worry about yourself first. Do you really know all of Islam where you can say, don't worry about me, I'm 50, 60, 70 years old. I know Islam, right? I understand Islam, take care of my kids. Maybe the reason your kids don't know so much is because you don't know so much about Islam. Did you ever think about that? Maybe because the reason that the kids are having an issue is because our principles of tarbiyah we haven't learned, Islamic tarbiyah. Have we thought about that? Now, alhamdulillah, we have ulama, like I know Shaykh Mujtaba has discussed Islamic tarbiyah before. So, alhamdulillah, I'm sure many of you are aware of that concept and you've heard that before. But some of these other ideas, we don't know practically how to change our akhlaq. And these are, again, I gave a few simple examples. I could pick any single topic I want and I guarantee there's going to be 20, 30 different opinions in this room alone. And that's an issue. That means that education seems to be our main topic. And not just superficial, surface level things where I'm just telling you, oh, one imam did this, one imam did this, send a salawat and we're done. No. We need to take a look at the imam's examples all throughout time, analyze all of them, try to figure out why did some of these imams seemingly do contradictory things? Why? That doesn't make sense. Why did some of the companions even fight amongst themselves? Some of the companions of the Shias, why were they disagreeing with each other? That's strange. I mean, it's very clear that we know, especially for the later imams, the Shias had a confusion about which person was the imam or not. Oh, this person's too young, he can't be the imam. This person's too dark, he can't be the imam. Why were the Shia so confused? These are things that we have to figure out and have to discuss and have to analyze. If we are not going to do it at these sessions, then you ask yourself, are you going to go and read a book at home? Yeah, maybe one or two of you might do that. But the majority of us, we don't have time to read, let's be honest. And even if we have the time to read, after work, when you come home, are you really looking forward to picking up a book and reading it? Probably not. You want to go home, you want to take your chai, you want to watch TV, open up Netflix, you want to watch a movie, you want to do something else. You want to relax because your day has been difficult. Most of us, a book and learning is not the way to relax. Our only opportunity to learn Islam, for many of us, is going to be at these majalis. So I do understand that for many of us, we're not used to being educated in these gatherings, but we really need to take a critical look, right? To do this sort of internal reflection, self-reflection. What should I be doing in these ayam azza? Wearing black, mourning, definitely there, recommended by Ahlul Bayt. Reciting poetry, yes, recommended by Ahlul Bayt. Hearing the story of Karbala, even though we've heard it over and over again, yes, recommended by the Ahlul Bayt. All of these things are there. Now, what we are adding on culturally about education, although it hasn't been specifically mentioned by the Ahlul Bayt, we do have this indirectly. We do have, for example, some narrations. I'll just give one and then we'll move on to the masa'ib for tonight, inshallah. And this one's from our 8th Imam, alayhi salam, where he says, Rahimallahu abdan ahya amrna. May Allah have mercy upon an abd who does ahya of our amr, who brings back to life, right? Ihya. He's giving life to our umur, our issues, our matters, things that matter to us. So he mentions this to one of these companions, and the companion says, Kayfa yuhyi amrukum? How do we give life to your umur? How do we give life to things that matter to you, your issues and your matters? What do we do? Imam Rida alayhi salam replies, قال يتعلم علومنا ويعلمها الناس فإن الناس لو علموا محاسن كلامنا لاتبعونا. Very simple. Teach people. It's simple. Education, ta'aleem and ta'allum. Teach people our information, our ulum, our knowledge. When you teach people this, if they understand the mahasin of our words, right, the beauty of our words, then they would follow us. And people, it's funny, when we want to go and attract people to the Ahlul Bayt, how do we end up doing it? Let's go explain the tragedy of Karbala. Let's go give them the sad stories. That's a whole separate discussion, but I want you to think about that. Was that how the Ahlul Bayt did da'wah? Did they go around and explain this is what happened in Karbala to the Christians and the Jews or anybody else? That's how they attracted them to Islam? It doesn't seem like that. It seems that as though there was a different route that they took. And maybe the reason that, this is going to open up a whole other can of worms, so I'll leave there. The Imam seemed to be, especially the 8th Imam, and we have many other hadith on this topic as well. So look, teach them what we've been teaching you. You Shia, what you should know from us, this is what you need to teach other individuals. Now, our issue is, if we don't know the ulum of the Ahlul Bayt, then what are we going to tell anybody else? If we don't know it ourselves, that's a problem for us. Then for our families, that's going to be an issue because then we have nothing to teach our kids. Then we expect it from madrasas and Sunday schools or camps. We expect these gaps to be filled up. And how are those gaps filled up? By people in these madrasas who themselves may not have proper Islamic education. And that's going to be an issue. With all due respect, obviously, people who are volunteering their time, that's wonderful. But if they're not properly trained, how much Islamic ulum can they really offer? Not much. They can do their best, but I mean, trust me, I sit with people who are involved in these madrasas, these Sunday schools, Saturday schools, whatever, even full-time Islamic schools. Constantly, I'm getting messages by them. You know, one of my students mentioned this about God's existence, and I don't know how to respond. One of the children asked about this issue. I don't know how to respond. I said, you're teaching them the aqaid. Like, if that's the case, if you have all these issues, how could you teach them aqaid then? That means that your aqaid has some issues. If you have this question about history, that means your history has issues. How can you teach somebody else if you don't know? Alhamdulillah, it's good that you volunteer, but maybe we need to make sure that we understand first before we go and preach to others. Inshallah, from tomorrow night, we will start with our discussion on the Salaat al-Mu'min. Hopefully from tonight, if we've been able to take away anything, it's that we don't have to always focus on the negative aspects of what led up to Ashura, although it's history and we're not denying that it took place. But maybe that negative aspect is not the most important thing for our majalis, possibly, right? Wallahu a'lam. And maybe simply mentioning all the fada'il and the nice positive things of history also may not benefit us in that same way right now as well. Although it's beneficial. Maybe, wallahu a'lam, maybe it's not what we need right now. Maybe what we need to do is take the history, take the akhlaq, take all these different ideas and figure out what is really needed in our local communities right now. What are the problems with our individuals? And this is the same exact thing that our maraji have been saying. Look at the words of Sayyid Sistani, hafidhahullah, or any marja. When they advise the khutbah, the people who are going and speaking and doing tabligh and Muharram, what do they say? Address divorce in your community. Address drug usage in your community. Address abortion in your community. Address atheism in your community. And you see that many speakers try to address those things, but when they do that, other people come and say, no, don't talk about that, we don't want that. Okay, so Maraji are advising one thing. Rationally, it seems like we need one thing. But our community members seem to be thinking we need something else. Maybe it's because there's an ada, right? We're used to a certain way. I understand that. Is that what's really needed? I want you to think about that, inshallah, and see if that really is in line with the teachings and the advice of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. And inshallah, tomorrow night we will begin our conversation and discussion of examining what the salah and namaz of a mu'min looks like. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. Apologies, I went over time a little bit. I just wanted to wrap up some of these final points instead of carrying it on tomorrow. One more salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. I'm sure everybody in this room at some point in their lives has had to make a trip. You've had to leave your home. Maybe it was for a short period of time, right? Maybe you took a day trip somewhere. Maybe you went away for the weekend and you had to leave your family behind. The way that we say khudafis or salam, or we do this wida to individuals, it's difficult, right? Sometimes. Especially those who are parents here and you leave your kids for that period of time, right? Your heart hurts a little bit. And normally we're not thinking in our minds that, I won't come back. Yeah, if we're thinking about death constantly, then maybe we could jump on the plane and it could be our last trip ever. But normally it's more about, I can't wait till I get back. I can't wait till I get to see my family again. This is what a normal human being thinks about when they're leaving their home. Now put your minds, put your hearts in the state of those who left Medina at that time. What was going through the heart of somebody like Sayyidah Zainab? She's leaving her home, Medina. And when she's leaving her home, of course, she can't get back. Think about the heart and mind of Ruqayya, of Sukaina, Sakina, as she's leaving. And she's looking forward to coming back home and seeing her family as well. And think about all these young children, All these mothers, all these fathers, leaving their homes. Some of them thinking, I'm leaving, but I can't wait to come back and see my families. And they say that when Zainab was leaving Medina, when she was trying to get on her camel, of course, when she was struggling and she was having trouble getting there, of course, Abbas was there, as he was always right next to Zainab, and made sure, no, please, Ukhti, let me come and help you, and helped her on her camel. Every step of the way from Medina to Mecca, from Mecca to Karbala, Zainab and Abbas are together. Abbas is next to Zainab the whole time, making sure, Ukhti, are you okay? Are you comfortable? Is there anything I can do for you? But now, look at the kalam of Zainab when she comes back, when she returns back to Medina after all these long trials and tribulations. They say that before she had entered, when she was in the outskirts of Medina, she had stopped. And that she had fallen off of her camel at that point from all the grief and the pain by just seeing the walls of Medina. And then she begins to speak almost to the walls of Medina or to the people of Medina. And she said, Medina, ya Medina, we left our fathers, we left our brothers, we left our sons, all our men are gone. Now look at us, we're just a group of women and children now. Look at me now, I fell off this camel. Before when I was leaving, Abbas was there to catch me. Now who's left there to catch me? When Imam Hussein arrives in Karbala, the first thing he asks Banu Asad is, whose land is this? And they say, it belongs to us, Banu Asad. Banu Asad says, what do you require from us, Ya Ibn Rasulullah? He says, I want to buy this land from you. He says, why do you want to buy this land, Ya Ibn Rasulullah? We can give this to you. He says, no, I need to purchase this because this will be our graveyard. Our qubur will be over here, so I want to buy this land from you. After arguing back and forth, finally they agreed, fine, we will sell this land to you. So they sell the land to Hussein. As soon as Imam Hussein agreed, he says, now I gift it back to Banu Asad, but with some shurut, with a condition. And he tells the men that I give you this as a gift, but the condition is once we have been killed and our bodies are laying here on the battlefield of Karbala, I know that you won't have the courage to come and defend us, and that's why our bodies will be here. We just ask that you come out after the army of Yazid has left. Just come and bury our bodies once the soldiers have left. That's all I ask of you. And they said, Na'am, of course, Ya Rasulullah, of course, Ya Ibn Rasulullah, we'll do that. And then the men leave. But of course, Imam Hussein knows that they won't be able to do that. So then he calls the women of Banu Asad. He calls them. He says, Ya Nisa, I spoke to your men, but now I have to speak to you as well. If your men are afraid of Ibn Ziyad and Shimr and Ubayd ibn Sa'd, and they refuse to bury us out of that cowardice, then I ask you, not immediately after, you don't have to come out when the soldiers are there, even a little after. When it's convenient for you, when you come and have to grab some water from Furat, as you come there, if you can, please just bury our bodies, then we would appreciate it. Please just do it at that point. And the Nisa, the women said, of course, Zahra, of course we'll do that for you. But Hussein knows that the women won't do this as well, so he sends the women away. He says, call the children of Banu Asad to me now. He says, your fathers and your mothers, they won't be able to bury us. They will be scared. They won't do this. I ask you, I know that you're just little children. When you go out in the deserts of Karbala, when you go and you play with some sand, just take some of that sand in your hands and throw it on top of our bodies. I know you don't have the strength to bury us. Just take some sand, a handful of sand and throw it on top of our bodies. After Karbala, when Imam Sajjad comes back to Medina and he's walking through the streets, he hears a faqir, somebody poor on the street saying, Ana al-gharib, Ana al-gharib, somebody help me. Imam Sajjad comes to him, he says, Ayyuha rajul, oh man, ya sheikh, can I ask you something? You're saying you're gharib. When you die, do you have any doubts or concerns in your mind? Are you concerned whether or not somebody will perform the ghusl for your body? Are you concerned whether or not somebody will put the kafan on your body? Are you concerned whether somebody will do the tadfeen of your body or not? And he says, no, Ya Rasulullah, I'm amongst Muslims. Why would I ever fear this? I know that a Muslim will come and wash my body. I know that Muslims will come and put a shroud and kafan on my body. And I know, of course, Muslims will put my body on the ground. He says, then don't call yourself ghareeb. My father Hussein was ghareeb in Karbala, who never got that burial, who never got the ghusl, and who never got his kafan. على لعنة الله على قوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون رضا بقضائه وتسليما لأمره صلوات على محمد وآل محمد.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. ثاني على حب الزهراء البتول. ثالث على حب الحسن والحسين بأعلى أصواتكم. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مظلوم كربلاء صلى الله عليك وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك وأناقت برحلك يا ليتنا فيا ليتنا كنا معكم سيدي فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. أي يوم دها الهدى بمصاب نزفت فيه شامخات الهضاب يوم سار الحسين من طيبة في خير سفر من رهطه والصحابي هجر الدار قد سرى كابن عمران من الليل يرتدي بإحابي يقطع الوعر مثل ما يقطع البدر سراه من خلال السحاب بنساء كأن صبرها الشم مثل رملة وزينب وربابي ونجوم صبية وصغار طلعت في هوادج كالقباب تتهادى بها هواد كطام قصور ملثمة الأعتاب ليس يدري. سلام الله عليك يا أبا عبد الله. ليس يدري يأوي إلى أي أرض أبي صنعاء أم بروس الشعاب ترك جوار جد هاد لما ذكرى للسنتين وكتابي حمل ضعونه من المدينة أبو علي وشال. حمل ضعونه من المدينة أبو علي وشال وياه صفوة من هلا شيالة حمال. حمل بعونه من مدينة وشال بالليل ويا صفوة من هلا شدت على الخيل وزينب تعاين للوطن ودموع تسيل تنادي بجميعنا نعود لو يتبدل الحال. ليش يا زينب عندك رجال وتخافين قبل المصيبة بالهضم والذيل تحسين وانتي تنخين بهليج ما ينتخونك ولا يستطيعون انهم يوصلونك واطفال عندك والحريم تلوحولك الله يساعد حالتك ما بين الانثيال. إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. لما عرضت البيعة على الإمام الحسين عليه السلام من قبل يزيد لعنة الله عليه الإمام رفضها رفضا قاطعا ثم توكل على رب العالمين وعزم على الخروج من مدينة جده رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم واتجه حول مكة. ولكن عند الخروج حدثت حوادث من وداع لقبر جده وقبر أمه الزهراء ووداع نساء أهل البيت ووداع أخيه محمد بن الحنفي عندما كان في مكة. أذكر إن شاء الله رواية من عندها وإن شاء الله نرجع على المصيبة. يقول عندما أراد ترك المدينة الإمام حسين عليه السلام أتته أم سلمة وهي زوجة النبي رضي الله عنها وهي كانت تبكي وتترجى الحسين فقالت له يا حسين لا تخزني بخروجك إلى العراق فإني سمعت جدك رسول الله يقتل ولدي الحسين بأرض العراق في أرض يقال لها كربلاء وكأنما تتوسل للإمام الحسين أنه لا تخرج يا ولدي، أنت ستقتل. وقالت له عندي تربة في قارورة دفعها إلي النبي، أعطاها النبي تربة من تراب كربلاء. فقال لها الحسين يا أماه وأنا والله أعرف ذلك وأعلم أني مقتول مذبوح ظلما وعدوانا، وقد شاء الله أن يرى حرمي ونسائي مشردين وأطفالي مذبوحين ومأسورين مقيدين، وهم يستغيثون فلا يجدون ناصرا ولا معينا. وتقول الرواية بعد إذن خرج الإمام من عندها، وعندما حدثت الحادثة في يوم عاشوراء كانت أم سلمة رضي الله عنها في المدينة، فبعد الظهر بعد توقيت الظهر نظرت إلى القارورة وإلى التربة التي دفعها إليها النبي، فبقيت تنظر إلى تلك التربة. عندما احمرت التربة علمت أم سلمة أن استشهد الإمام الحسين عليه السلام، فكانت تفور القارورة بالدم. وفي حادثة أخرى قبل أن يترك المدينة الإمام الحسين عليه السلام وعند وداع المدينة، وكيف يخرج من المدينة وفيه قبر جده رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم، ذهب إلى قبر جده رسول الله شاكيا مما ألم به من مصائب وهموم، فأتى قبر النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وهو يقول السلام عليك يا رسول الله، أنا الحسين بن فاطمة وصبتك الذي خلفتني في أمتك، فاشهد عليهم يا نبي الله أنهم خذلوني ولم يحفظوني، وهذه شكواي إليك حتى ألقاك. وكان يشكو لرسول الله لجده ويبكي، فوقف عند قبر الرسول صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم فصلى ركعتين، ولما فرغ من صلاته وقف حزينا كئيبا يناجي ربه، قام يدعو عند قبر الرسول، يعرف أنه هذا المكان الدعاء فيه مستجاب، وعند خروجه يريد أن يدعو دعوة مستجابة. قال اللهم إن هذا قبر نبيك محمد وأنا ابن بنت محمد، وقد حضرني من الأمر ما قد علمت، اللهم إني أحب المعروف وأنكر المنكر، وأنا أسألك يا ذا الجلال والإكرام بحق هذا القبر ومن فيه إلا ما اخترت لي ما هو لك رضا ولرسولك رضا. فعند الدعاء صار يبكي بكاء شديدا، ثم كان قريبا من صلاة الصبح، يعني تقريبا ساعة أو ساعتين، قريب على صلاة الصبح عند الفجر، وضع رأسه الشريف الإمام الحسين على قبر النبي وهو في تلك الحالة ويبكي، فالظاهر نام على قبر الشريف، وإذا به عليه السلام يرى في المنام جده رسول الله صلى الله عليه وآله قد أقبل عليه، ومعه ملائكة عن يمينه وعن شماله ومن أمامه ومن خلفه، وهناك أنبياء أيضا عن يمينه وشماله يقبلون على الحسين. وجاء وضم الحسين عليه السلام إلى صدره وقبل ما بين عينيه، ويقول رسول الله حبيبي يا حسين كأني أراك عن قريب مرملا بدمائك، مذبوحا بأرض كرب وبلاء بين عصابة من أمتي، وأنت مع ذلك عطشان. رسول يروي كيف يستشهد الإمام الحسين في المنام، يقول له: يا حسين أنت ستستشهد هكذا في هكذا أرض، وأنت مع ذلك عطشان لا تسقى وظمآن لا تروى، وهم مع ذلك يرجون شفاعتي يوم القيامة. أي قتلة الإمام الحسين، هم يقتلون بالحسين عليه السلام ويعرفون من هو جده ويرجون الشفاعة من جده يوم القيامة، وهم مع ذلك يرجون شفاعتي يوم القيامة. لا أنالهم الله شفاعتي. فجعل الحسين عليه السلام في منامه ينظر إلى جده ويبكي ويقول: يا جده، لا حاجة لي في الرجوع إلى الدنيا، فخذني إليك وأدخلني معك في قبرك. يقول لي: ضمني عندك يا جداه في هذا الضريح، علني يا جد من بلوى زماني استريح، ضاق بي يا جد من رحب الفضا كل فسيح، فعسى طود الأسى يندك بين الدكتين. وصل ويلي قبر جده وبكى حسين، يودعه والدمع يهمل من العين، هو فوق الضريح وصاح صوتي: يا جدي فارقك غصبا علي، يا جد بوسط لحدك ضمني وياك، تراني الضيم شفت عقب عينك. يقل له: يا حبيبي وعدك هناك، تروح وتنذبح بالغاضرية، تروح وتنذبح بالغاضرية، تروح وتنذبح يا حسين عطشان، وتبقى على الأرض مطروح عريان، يظل جسمك لصد الخيل ميدان، ولا تبقى من ضلوعك بقية، ولا تبقى من ضلوعك بقية. أيقتل الصيب ظمآنا ومن دمه، تروى الصوارم والعسالة الذبل، لهفي لزينب تسعى نحوه، ولها قلب تزايد فيه الوجود والوجل، ناح في قبره عليه النبي، وبكت فاطم وعلي، إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا آل بيت محمد أي منقلب ينقلبون. نسألك اللهم وندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله أن تشافي وتعافي مرضانا ومرضى المؤمنين والمؤمنات ومرضى الحاضرين، تغفر ذنوبنا وتقضي حوائجنا بحرمة هذه المجالس وبحرمة مولانا صاحب الأمر والزمان، إلى أرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات ومن مات على الإيمان، ولا سيما موت الحاضرين رحم الله من يقرأ سورة الفاتحة تسبقها الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. رحم الله من ذكر الله من آل محمد.
يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
جنب قربانك يا صار الله جنب قربانك يا صار الله بعدي أنت على عبد الله بعدي أنت على عبد الله تومي علي بسر خاطري تومي علي بسر خاطري يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
جنب قربانك يا صار الله فأبي أنت أبا عبد الله تومي علي بسر خاطري تومي علي بسر خاطري يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
يا حسين يا مولاي
حسين يا مولاي
يا حسين يا مولاي به تو عشق و بلای تو قسم به تو عشق و بلای تو قسم به تو کرب و بلای تو قسم به تو کرب و بلای تو قسم نام تو بر لب ما زود نام تو بر لب ما ذکر روز و شب ما ذکر روز و شب ما یا حسین یا مولا يا حسين يا مولا يا حسين يا مولا
حسين يا مولاي
بتو عشق و بلای تو قسم بتو عشق و بلای تو قسم بتو کرب و بلای تو قسم بتو کرب و بلای تو قسم نام تو بر لب ما ذکر روز و شب ما ذکر روز و شب ما یا حسین یا مولا
يا حسين يا مولاي
یا حسین یا مولا
يا حسين يا مولاي
یا حسین یا مولا
يا حسين يا مولاي
تو که کشتی نجات همه‌ای یادگار علی و فاطمه‌ای یادگار علی و فاطمه‌ای ای چراغ دل ما گل ای چراغ دل ما گل باغ دل ما ای چراغ دل ما گل باغ دل ما یا حسین یا مولا
يا حسين يا مولاي
یا حسین یا مولا
حسين يا مولاي
یا حسین یا مولا
حسين يا مولاي
تو که کشتی نجات همه‌ای تو که کشتی نجات همه‌ای یادگار علی و فاطمه‌ای یادگار علی و فاطمه‌ای یادگار علی و فاطمه‌ای ای چراغ دل ما گل باغ توس اللي حاجة ما حرمة توس حمد المحرم حرمة توس حمد المحرم حرمة توس أي إمام الشهداء أي إمام الشهداء رب ريش بقى رب ريش بقى يا حسين يا مولاه يا حسين يا حسين يا مولاه يا حسين يا مولاه يا حسين يا مولاه اللي حاجة ما قربة توس اللي حاجة ما قربة توس أمد الهارن حرمة توس أمد الهارن حرمة توس أي إمام الشهداء أي إمام الشهداء رب ريش بقى رب ريش بقى يا حسين يا مولاه 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 فعلي أنت على أهل النار جانب الوارد يا سار الله فعلي أنت على أهل النار قومي همي قومي همي بسر فاطمي بسر فاطمي يا حسين يا مولاه 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 يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين يا حسين صلى الله عليه وسلم الحجاج عن لذاته من بعض الشهور وأنا المحرم عن لذاته كل الدهور أحرم الحجاج عن لذاتهم بعض الشهور وأنا المحرم عن لذاتهم كل الدهور يا حسين 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 أحرم الحجاج عن لذاتهم بعد الشهور وأنا المحرم عن لذاتهم كل الدهور كيف لا أحرم وأنا في مشعر الحسن على رسل الحسين وحسينا وحسين وحسينا 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 لست أنسى طريدا عن جوار المصطفى لا إذا بالقبة النوراء يشكو أسفا قائلا يا جد واسم الصبر من قلبي عفا ببناء بأبي أي الشهيد وشهيدا بأبي أي الشهيد ندبت مصرعه شمس الحياة وحسين 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 ومدين جده الهادي الأمين كان غوث الناس في دنيا ودين وقتيلا جده الهادي الأمين كان غوث الناس في دنيا ودين فننادي يا إثارة الحسين نرتجي ثار قتيل العبرات وحسينا 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 وحسين طالبا ثار غسيلا بالدماء ذوبت أحشاؤنا والظما ما سواك المرتجى يحمل حما يا مغيث الخلق يوم النكبات وحسين 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 السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا حبيب الله السلام عليك يا محمد بن عبد الله ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا علي يا أمير المؤمنين السلام عليك يا فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين السلام على الحسن والحسين سيد شباب أهل الجنة السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفدائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على التسعة المعصومين الحسين علي بن حسين زين العابدين ومحمد بن عبد الله علي بن النبيين وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي الجواد وعلي بن محمد الهادي والحسن بن علي العسكري والخلف الحجة القائم المهدي حجتك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك اللهم صل عليه صلاة كثيرة دائمة اللهم كن وليك الحجة الحسن صلوات عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ثانية وحفظ وقال ونصر ودليلا وعينا حتى تسكنهم أرضك طوعا وتمتعهم فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين.
أحسن الله إليك.